Good morning, everyone. Before I turn it over to Annie, I have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over. Number one is we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our website later this week or the beginning of next. And you will be receiving a copy of the PowerPoint. However, there's not much to it uh, other than some links. We're asking that you use the Q&A feature only if you ask questions, and we'll pause at the end of each section to address them. And if you want to talk between between you and the other registrants, go ahead and use the chat. But we're only going to be looking at the Q&A section uh, on this. Um, Lastly, you will receive a 2-minute survey afterwards to give us some feedback on how we might make this any better. You can go ahead and switch slides on me, Ann. There we go. Good morning, everybody. This webinar is being sponsored by SCORE. Um, uh, Next slide, please. Um, what is SCORE? SCORE is a network of a lot of professional volunteers that mentor small businesses. We began back in 1964, and we currently have over 200 chapters and 11,000 volunteers. So no matter what stage your business is in, SCORE can mentor you, and it's pretty easy to request. As you can see, the SBA has kind of mentions that anybody uses SCORE. Sorry, uh, gets 3 hours of mentoring, reports higher revenue, increased business growth. Um, we're there if you need us. Go ahead, Ann. Sorry. We do operate under a code of ethics that all of the counselors have to agree to and sign off on every year. And it talks about how we don't accept any money, and we can't really we need to be totally divested of any mentoring or any customer that we service, and it's all confidential and protected by the U.S. government. Go ahead. Um, Locally, we have about 40, locally being in Stark County, Ohio, we have like 40 volunteers. And we're sponsored by a number of foundations in our area. And we are what are we? We are a resource partner with the SBA. Next slide, please. So here's a QR code to visit our website. It's pretty easy, score.org. Actually, that's the website that we'll be posting the recording on. So if you need a mentor or you want to become a volunteer, this is where you would go. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann. Ann, it's all yours.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Sharp. I am the owner and founder of Excellent Admin, and I'm going to be running our second session of QuickBooks Training Online. So this is what I consider the intermediate. So for those of you that were on the session last week, we built our QuickBooks from the ground up, meaning we registered, we signed up, we linked our accounts, we reviewed chart of accounts, we reviewed reports we would be doing. And now today we're actually going to be working inside of the software in order to be able to produce data inside of the reports that we reviewed that were empty and start to see how our QuickBooks is going to develop and change. So a couple things on this slide, just want to go over a breakdown of what we're going to cover. We're going to work on categorizing today. Last class, we got everything inputted, meaning we learned to manually enter transactions, how to import the data, and then obviously how to integrate because QuickBooks Online, the entire purpose of it is the integration feature. We're going to talk about creating rules, what those are, how they play in. We're going to work on reconciling. Reconciling is how you tell what's inside of QuickBooks ties directly to your bank account, or if you receive payments from customers and you mark it paid, making sure that your bank actually cashed those checks for the proper amount. We're going to work on entering bills and paying bills and printing checks. Not everybody uses all of those features, but if you do, we'll go over it as it all is one ballpark together. We're going to talk about creating invoices and then mapping invoices to the proper buckets on your profit and loss statement. This would be the items that you might be selling or services that you offer. And then we're going to look at reviewing matching transactions and what a match transaction actually means inside of QuickBooks, because that's one of the biggest areas people struggle with inside of QuickBooks. We're going to look at how to create and edit items. And then obviously we're going to look at some customer and vendor management as we start to implement some of those things. Again, use the Q&A section as Ed said. I will stop at the end of each section. We will take 2 brief 10-minute breaks through the course of this session. We'll take the first one before we get started with bills, and we'll take the second one after we do invoicing. I will obviously let you guys know when we're going to take those breaks. And then as we go through, I will answer questions for each session. And then if you need anything else after that, at the end, I will give you my contact information as well. Okay. So we're going to get out of our PowerPoint for now because we are not going to worry about that. And we are actually going to get into our Internet Explorer here, or I use Google Chrome. And we're going to go to QuickBooks Online because this is our login portal. And we're going to go ahead and get signed in. And it's prompting me to fill out additional information. And I don't want to set up a keypad for training purposes today. Okay, so we get right inside of our QuickBooks. Obviously, there's still not a ton of stuff going on our dashboard yet, as we haven't really done a whole lot, but we are starting to see bank accounts, activities, things like that as well. So where we're going to start, we're going to go over in our black bar here, and we're going to hit transactions. The transactions is automatically going to default to bank transactions. And then you'll see these are the accounts that we obviously either imported or integrated. If it's integrated, you can see that it's updating as of 5 hours ago. If it's imported, you can see it hasn't updated since we were on our session last week. Okay, so you can tell the difference between what you're manually importing and what is automatically syncing. And then obviously down here, you have a list of all the transactions that we now need to categorize. Okay, so you have 3 tabs: for review, categorized, and excluded. Everything we have inside of QuickBooks right now is for review. Once we've reviewed it and told it where to go, it goes into categorized. And if for some reason we have a duplicate transaction or a transaction that we don't need, we want to take it from for review to excluded. Okay. There are going to be very rare transactions in excluded. Majority of it should go into categorized. Okay. So for simplicity purposes, let's start with the operating bank account here. And so if I scroll down, you can filter these things by date. So we obviously went backwards in date. So you can filter there. You can change by description. So you put everything that's the same together for simplicity purposes. And you can also filter by amount. Okay. So as you can see, Best Buy, QuickBooks Online seems to think is office supplies. This is actually based on this transaction correct because I bought a computer and a printer, which would be office supplies. But in case you had bought something else that might be more furniture and equipment, you would obviously need to adjust that. So like I told you guys on the last class, sometimes it knows what it is, sometimes it has no idea, okay? So for this case, it actually did know what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and hit confirm. Now that transaction has come out of this list here and goes into the categorized list like I told you, okay? Again, if you flip back here, we want to hit confirm again because this is right. And we want to hit confirm again because this is right. And confirm again because this is right. Okay. So then let's go find one that's probably not right. So underneath where it just says checking, it assumes all these checkings are owner's draws. If you actually click on this and you can open it, you can see where the money went to if you do transfers a lot. I do transfers a lot because I move money from my operating account to my payroll account. So I move money weekly, biweekly, pending how the funds are and those types of things. Okay. So this account ending in 2223 is not an owner's draw account. It's actually another bank account that I have. So this would be something that we would need to take this information here and record it as a transfer. And then you would want to select the proper bank account. Now, we had not created this bank account, so I can create it, citizens. And then this one ends in 2223. Because again, we always put the last of the account number. And so we're going to add this as the option here. And it still didn't do it. And it is a bank account, so it is considered cash on hand. Okay. So now it's a transfer. So I have clicked it open, reviewed the account, clicked it to be a transfer, selected where it needs to go. And then I would hit confirm. Okay. I did select where it's transferring to. Okay, QuickBooks does not like that. Let's kick it back to categorize. Well, let me do it this way. Okay, so QuickBooks looks like it's having a little bit of an issue with the transfer feature, but we were able to categorize it, which will do the same thing. The reason you do transfers versus categorizing is really meant for like checks and expenses, where if you're doing money movement between accounts, if you do the transfer, then QuickBooks will pick it up on the other side based on data that has either been imported or manually or is syncing together or manually entered and match it together, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay. So let's go to another page and find something else that maybe isn't categorized properly. Here's one they do know. McDonald's is meals and meals. So that's proper. So you could hit confirm on that one. And then let's kick down some other pages here. And these are sorted in alphabetical order, which is why you see everything kind of together. So here's one, SBA EIDL loan. It has it as mortgage interest. It's not. It would be a loan. So we would need to make sure that this got corrected. So again, you click on it to open this gray box, and then you would do SBA loan, which is another one we have not created. So we're going to want to create a category. And then you can confirm it. And then you will notice that the other ones here went from telling you it was mortgage interest to assign a category because it doesn't know where it goes. And then it recognized that it's SBA for you. So some of it as you're creating it is going to change automatically. Where this does not help you, if you're doing checks. So if I go back into my bucket here and go to page, I think 2 had checks on it. Maybe it was page 1. These. So if I change a check, say this is cost of goods sold, and I hit confirm, every check now says it's cost of goods sold. Well, not every check I write is a cost of goods sold, right? So if you adjust one thing, sometimes it's going to adjust everything that it thinks is a like or similar bucket. And so you definitely want to pay attention to that. Couple things you can do inside of here that are really cool to try to make this process a little bit easier for you is I'm going to jump all the way to the back end here. So see Verizon Wireless, it recognizes that it's a telephone expense, which Verizon for me will always be a telephone expense because that's my cell phone provider. And so down here, you can create a rule. So this rule can be named Verizon. And so it's anytime money comes out, and I'm going to put all accounts instead of just that one bank account. So if for some reason I paid my Verizon bill out of a different account, it's going to categorize it as an expense into telephone. Okay. And it's going to put in who we paid. Now, if I scroll all the way down, it says you can automatically confirm these transactions that match these conditions as they're downloaded from your bank. Auto confirm means you never see it in the for review tab. It automatically gets put in. It makes your life a lot easier as far as reviewing goes. It can make your transaction list get smaller and smaller. You would only want to use this for things that never change. Verizon's, loan payments, utility providers, that type of thing. You don't want to use it for like gas stations because if you go to a gas station and buy a drink or a coffee, and then you also get gas at that gas station, it won't know to where to put the data. It will always lump it into one bucket. So you only want to do this for things that don't change. Okay. I personally do not like auto confirm. I want it to create the rule. I want it to put the proper tagging there, but I don't want it to automatically put the data in. The reason for that is I can't review it if it does that without digging in my financials for this data. So I don't like the auto confirm button. So I will uncheck that and then I will show you what this does. So if I hit save, so down here, if you click here, it auto-populated it and it has a rule it's applied. So it recognized that it's Verizon based on what we created. Okay. So I can hit confirm and I can hit confirm here. Okay. What would be something else I might want to use a rule for? Um, the EIDL could be something you use a rule for because it's, again, something that never changes, even if the payment amount changes. So we could call this SBA loan, money out. Again, I make it all accounts, so it applies to everything. In case you ever got a new bank account in here, you definitely just want to make sure you have it. And then this is going to be more of a transfer because it's going to a loan. And again, the auto confirm stayed off because I've already adjusted it once. Okay. Perfect. So that's how we categorize the expenses that are integrating or manually imported inside of here. Okay. As a brief review, we're going to look at if we go from operating account and we go to view register. Okay. Everything that we've been working on categorizing is populating in here, correct? But then you can also see I wrote a check in here and a couple other transactions in here that were not things that we did from that screen. They were manually entered. So again, as a review, you would click on this gray bar here, which opens the ability to put a transaction in. You want to tell it what type of transaction it is. Expense, check, deposit are the big ones you're going to use. Okay. So I'm going to put in an expense and then I'm going to say that I paid Verizon again. Okay. It automatically is populating the previous transaction. This is a feature that QuickBooks allows you to turn on and off, which we'll talk about at a later date. And say I just decided I went to Verizon and I bought a new phone. So my phone was 1200. And so I can hit save. So now that transaction is populating in here, even though it didn't come from the transactions tab here. But when that transaction for 1200 clears my bank account, it will recognize that it's already in there and I can match them together, which again, we'll talk about as we get further along in today's session. Okay. You have to categorize everything. Whether you use rules or don't use rules, you have to categorize everything before you can do a reconciliation. For training purposes today, we're not going to categorize over 100 transactions, okay? We are going to show you what happens if you, for some reason, don't have everything categorized. Hmm. What it does to the reconciliation screen, and then obviously we'll show you what it does if you have everything categorized, okay? Any questions so far about categorizing or the rules that we worked in because they kind of tie hand in hand?
No, you do have a few questions, Anne.
Okay. Uh, so Gwen's question is, my QuickBooks has a different screen than it says add, not confirm. Gwen, that's okay. They obviously are, it would depend on what package you are versus what package we're training in. It also, they're doing always updating that module. So sometimes what I'm showing, even the PowerPoint pictures might be a little bit different. They mean the same thing. Yeah, that's not a big deal whatsoever. David, to answer your question, so he asked about the EIDL loan and the bank feed. Are you able to split both principal and interest? The answer to that is yes. We will actually talk about that briefly today if we have time for it. If not, it is on the next class session. So Amanda says, with categorizing checks, do we need to go into each check transaction and assign the correct category? Or will each check categorized entry continue to update all other checks expenses? So Amanda, you do have to categorize each check individually and assign the correct category because it is going to be constantly changing it to whatever the last check is that you confirmed. Um, if you use the bill pay feature and print checks inside of QuickBooks, that that change is irrelevant. It will recognize that the check has already been put in QuickBooks, but we'll go over that as we kind of get into the bill pay portal. Fernando says, how can I view all my transactions on a daily basis for all my bank accounts without selecting each bank account? The answer is you can't. You have to be working in one bank account. The only place you can see it, Fernando, is where it's listed right here. And it just tells you how many transactions. But in order to see what's of these 99 transactions, you have to actually click into the account and see it. There is no lump sum bucket for all. God, I'm not sure I understand the question. It says, how does test rule feature work? You want to give me a little bit more detail about that? And Joseph says, in the column of chart of accounts, what does the pair to another account do? And why does it say pair instead of just doing it? Um, QuickBooks will give you an idea that it's the same transaction it can see in another bank account because it's within the same day, same dollar amount, but it's not an absolute. And so they want you to confirm it to try to make it easy on both sides. So once you initiate the transaction on one side of it, meaning the first bank account where the funds maybe were being withdrawn, then on the other side, it's going to prompt you to match it with the where the transactions were deposited, but it needs you to trigger one side or the other. That's why it doesn't just do it. Erica, yeah, you obviously saw via the training that the transfer button doesn't seem to be working. Flip it to categorize and it'll do the same thing. Just make sure the proper account is still there. Greg says, if you're switching to QuickBooks Online and have an existing business, how do you start with an existing balance? Do you go back to the beginning of time, import this year? What is the best option? So, Greg, this is a two-part question. Are you trying to bring your data from wherever you were into QuickBooks Online, or are you trying to start totally fresh? And then Erica says, I made a new category called taxes and retirement, and the memo says PNC, but it won't save. What am I doing wrong? So if you go to chart of accounts, look at new. So you're saying the memo says PNG, or are you talking about in the description of the actual account, Erica? We won't talk about copying transactions until next session. Katie says, I use a personal credit card for business expenses and then I pay the charges for these from my business account. How do I categorize these checks? Katie, are you putting that personal credit card inside of QuickBooks or are you only doing the payment inside of QuickBooks? Ed, Tammy's asking if there's a video from the first class. I know you guys just sent it out. I don't know if Tammy attended. If you guys could follow up with that for me.
Will do.
Okay, so Katie, when you put the check in, since you don't have your personal credit card tied to QuickBooks, are you breaking down underneath the accounts to categorize what was spent on that credit card? An anonymous attendee said, how often should I be categorizing items? That's up to you, depends on the number of transactions. I recommend at least at a minimum of a monthly basis while the data is still fresh. Nicole, I do show forecasting, but not until the last session. Angie, we'll get to that question later, so I'll leave that in the box here about writing off expenses without payment. So Greg, you're bringing data from other accounts. So you have to pick a date that you want to start that account. And then what'll happen is there'll be a bucket on your balance sheet that says beginning balance. And that just states that as of January 1st of 2025, you had $10,000 in the bank. And so it sits there to go against your retained earnings instead of having to go back to the beginning of time. Because you just need to know that there were funds in that account when you started your QuickBooks. If you're using another accounting software and want to bring the data over, the data should come over and you wouldn't need to do that. But that's what QuickBooks Online does in order to say there was a beginning balance. Nadine says, I use 3 different credit cards for my business. Should I add all 3 into QuickBooks business account? Is it one statement or is it all separate statements? Then yes, you need to import Nadine, then you do need to import all of them individually since they're separate statements. So Katie, for yours to go back to the credit card, the personal credit card doesn't need to be in there. When you cut the check, you're cutting the check to either your name or the supplier, and then you're capturing where that breakdown is by what you categorized on what you spent. So that's the only way you put it in. It's just a manual transaction at that point. Or obviously when the check clears from the bank, you split that transaction that way. Scott says a follow-up question on the test rule question. When you go to a bank transaction and select categorize, match, and transfer, and then create a rule, is there a test rule dialog box? And how does that work? So, Scott, great question. Underneath your little icon here, your gear icon, there is a all list bucket. And then down here are all the different types of lists we can use. And there should be, oh, it's not here. Okay, hold on, they moved it. Yeah, I'm sorry, they moved it. It's underneath transactions, and then you can see rules here. And then you can see here are the two rules we created. You can obviously create a new rule. You can export rules, import rules if you have more. You can stop a rule, you can edit it, adjust it based on names, or if you make a typo, or decide you want to do the auto add feature. But this is how you do it. So transactions, go to rule, and then you'll see your list of rules. Because rules change, they could change over time. Greg says, if you have a receipt that has both business and personal, should you put only the business on there or should you put both? Greg, you should put both, and the personal expenses categorized as either owner's draw, shareholder distribution, or something along those lines so that it doesn't show on your financial statements, P&L, but obviously ties directly to what actually cleared the bank. Okay, so it looks like we got through majority of the questions. There's a couple I'm going to leave here as unanswered while we kind of jump along. So again, this is how you edit and create rules. Now we're going to talk about reconciling. So from the transaction tab here, you're going to go to bank account. Okay. And technically, you should be reconciling bank accounts, loans, credit cards, um, anything that you get a statement for or have transactions happening each month. Or some statements like money markets might be quarterly, okay? Or investment portfolios might be quarterly. The reason we reconcile is to protect from fraud, don't want fraud, duplicates. We spot, it's a way to check what actually clears your bank versus what you wrote on your check. You'd be surprised how many times I see somebody write 25, they meant 2,500, but they wrote $25. So only $25 clears instead of 2,500. It's also a way to make sure there are no duplicates inside of QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online can be known for duplicates if you use the invoicing feature, and then obviously your stuff is integrating and you don't understand how to match it together. And then it's just another way to make sure you didn't miss any expenses or any revenue in any given time frame. Okay. Now, most banks reconcile month to month, meaning it's the beginning of the month to the end of the month. Credit cards might be mid-month to mid-month, beginning of month, end of month. So you could potentially be reconciling multiple times a month, pending when your accounts close. Okay. But it should be done every month. So how do you get to the reconciliation screen? There's three ways to get to it. First one is if you click reconcile, you're going to see a wizard. If you've never reconciled before, you'll have a wizard that pops up, okay? And then you're going to hit get started. You can click out of the other wizards. And then you want to know what you want to reconcile. So of all the accounts that we have, the two bank accounts that we created, and then you can see our Amex, our line of credit, our credit card. So you can see all the accounts here that we would want to reconcile. So for training purposes, we're going to click this one. My beginning balance says 0 because there was no beginning balance for this account. Okay, we did not integrate this account. We entered a transaction for it, so the beginning balance is 0. Okay. Ending balance. This would be what my statement tells me at the end of the month. I had $100. Okay. So beginning of the month, I had $0. End of the month, I had $100 just for training purposes. And then What date did that happen? So I'm going to go ahead and date this as of April 30th. Okay. Because that's the last month that it closed because we're on May 8th. Then you could put down here if you receive service charges, so bank fees, or if you receive interest, you can put them on this screen here based on whatever date you got it, and then assign it to the proper expense account or income account. Okay. You would hit start reconciling. From here, it gives you a summary screen. Statement ending balance, cleared balance, beginning balance was 0, and then if you had payments or debits, okay? And then this button here says $100. That's the difference because that's what our thing was, all right? Now say I made a typo and I was like, oh, it should be $1,000 or it should be $500, not 100, right? You can click edit, change it, save. Now this number changes, okay? You can also, if you have a ton of transactions, you can filter by just payments or just deposits instead of filtering it by all. Okay. What's really, really important is at the end of whatever you're doing, this warning symbol is not here. It should be a green check mark if you have done it right. Okay. So I'm going to mark this 500. I got the green check mark. It's right. Okay. So now my beginning balance is going to go from 0 to on my next statement, my beginning balance is going to be 500. Okay. Now, if this wasn't a perfect situation, and obviously it was at this moment in time, and I needed to come back for it, you can hit save for later, or you can close without saving and start over. Okay. If you have the green check mark and everything matched perfectly and you've selected everything you could see on your bank statement, okay, then you can hit finish now. It's going to kick you back out to the screen. It's going to tell you when it was reconciled last. You can go to history by account here. You can add your bank statement if you would like. So it's someplace to keep all your data in one house. Okay. And then you can view reports to see what transactions either haven't cleared or what cleared on that actual report. Now, pending your users. So if you're not the person that does the reconciliation, but you have a team member that does, you will see history by account. Who did it? What date was it done? And then did they attach the statements? Okay. The second way to do it, instead of going just to the reconciliation screen, is if you're on bank transactions and you go to bank register, you get a big green button in the top here that says reconcile. It's going to take you to the same screen. Again, the American Express had a balance based on the date that we sunk it to. So it has a beginning balance that hopefully, if your statements match the dates of when you matched everything, it matches. If it doesn't, it's okay. For the first one, it's okay. Once you've fixed the first initial reconciliation, if you're moving data mid-month to mid-month, or you're moving data and starting new, meaning QuickBooks is starting with whatever the bank has, then it will automatically populate a transaction that will allow you to still match what your ending balance is. Okay. After the first reconciliation, these should match every single time. Your beginning balance should match your beginning balance on your statement, your ending balance you're typing in, your ending statement date you're typing in. Okay. So for training purposes from here, I'm going to put $1 in so it allows me to go to the next screen. Again, I'm going to do April 30th here. I'm going to click start. And then you can see I got my little warning difference sign. I've got the data I've put in. There's no transactions because we had not categorized anything for this. So I'm going to hit save for later. And then it'll say resume reconciliation. That's how you know you saved it for later. Okay. Any questions about the reconciliation or why we do it? You have to reconcile everything. It's really important. It's also another barrier of protection when it comes to an audit perspective. If you were to be audited, you're going to look to make sure you've closed your financials and reconciled out with the statements inside of your accounting software. Okay, looks like we have a couple questions. Let me go over here to the questions. Nicole says, can you scan and upload statements for reconciliation or do you have to enter it? You can scan them in and attach them to the reconciliation summary, but you still have to actually do the reconciliation yourself. Erica says, how often? And then she questioned monthly. I would say to do it based on when your statements close. So monthly, stuff might close quarterly. The big reason you want to do it more frequently instead of infrequently is because the longer you wait to do it, the more you have to dig to remember what the data was, or the more you have to dig for files to figure out if it was properly cached or properly done. So that's why I encourage people to do it on a monthly basis. At a minimum, quarterly, but you should do it monthly. David, we'll talk about duplicates as we're going through today's class. When I mentioned it a few minutes ago, we talked about how the reconciliation will help eliminate duplicates. Because once you do the reconciliation, you'll be able to make sure that there isn't two transactions for the same dollar amount the same day inside of your QuickBooks. Nicole, you can only reconcile monthly. You can't do it weekly really because you don't get a statement from your bank or from your transactions every week. And then if you get quarterly statements from like investments or things like that, you could do it that way. But really, it's usually a monthly basis. So Scott says if you reconcile and then go back and delete the reconciled transaction for the month, it causes the balance for the next month to be off. How do you correct this? So Scott, two questions. Did you delete it on purpose or was it an accident? And if you deleted it, is there another transaction for the same dollar amount, which is why it caused you to do the deletion? The reality is it walks you through on a wizard if you deleted a reconciled transaction to put it back into place, or at least tell you what it was. Sometimes I see where we deleted a transaction because it was a duplicate. So if you go to your reconciliation screen, you will still have another transaction for that dollar amount shown in that screen that you just didn't select didn't select the proper one for the reconciliation. Nadine says, I started about the 3 credit card statements. Do I go back to January 2025? I would go back as far as you can with the credit card statements. If you've already filed 2024 taxes, then yes, you could start with January 2025. If we sign up in 2025 to do our records, can we backtrack and set up expense records for 2024? Gwen, the answer is yes. As you saw when we did the import last class, you can backdate the data as far as you need to bring the data into QuickBooks, pending your institution, credit card provider, and what they have available. Greg says for the mortgage interest escrow, it all comes out one statement. I try to separate it, but at the end of the year, the mortgage company changes those and adjusts this. What's the proper way to do this monthly? Separate it the best you can with whatever information you're given on a monthly basis. And then I would recommend at the end just doing a journal entry to offset and tie to what the mortgage company might have from an adjustment perspective, because obviously the escrow might change. Priscilla says, how do I add a credit card payment that is not showing on the QuickBooks register? So you would do that through manual transaction. So if you go into transaction tab and you want to go to bank transaction and then go to your bank register, make sure you're in the proper account that the payment came from, or you could go to where it went to. So if you're paying a credit card, Amex is our credit card. And then I'm going to add a credit. So I got $1,000 payment here, and it came from my Citizens bank account. and then you would hit save. So you would manually enter the transaction like we've been talking about. Scott says, can you undo a reconciliation after finalizing, and will it put back in what it was before? So Scott, you cannot undo the reconciliation. Only the accountant can undo the reconciliation. And just because you undo the reconciliation does not mean it will bring in a transaction that you deleted, sadly. For Priscilla, for the credit card payment that is paid with points, I would put that against an owner's draw or shareholder distribution, because you're using there's no way to track that. It's not income, it's not another expense, it's not another bank account. So you would want to run it through your equity accounts. Jane says, if you already filed 2024 but never reconciled QuickBooks, can you simply ignore 2024 records and begin reconciling in 2025? The answer is yes, Jane. You're going to do what's called a mass reconciliation, meaning you're just going to make sure you select everything that cleared in 2024 to give you and make sure it matches for a beginning balance of 2025, and then you would start fresh with January's. Nicole says, if you used a joint personal account to pay bills and you don't want to link the account, how do you do that? Nicole, you would do journal entries, which we're not going to talk about till the next class, to enter that information and to say that it came from personal money, but it was a business expense to be categorized. So it says, for a loan or credit card interest against the principal, where can we see that? That's going to be under a split transaction, which we're going to talk about next. We have not talked about that yet. So. Okay, so it looks like we've answered all those questions for now. So we're going to minimize this. So if we go back into our transaction tab, and so we're going to go to like a credit, let's go to the credit card, and let's go here. Amazon is a really good one. So let's click on Amazon. And so Amazon is assuming that it's office supplies and materials, but it's actually more than one thing. So I want to split this transaction. So I might have supplies and materials for $100. And then I have owner's draw for $44.10, because $44.10 of the transaction was personal. Okay. So I can put personal, and then in the description here, maybe I put paper and ink. And then I can click add and confirm. Okay. So to split a transaction from the screen that is for review, you click on the transaction and you click split transaction, and it opens this screen. Okay. You will do this for payroll when you need to split up what are company taxes, the unemployment, Social Security, Medicare, those types of things. Payroll would be one you would split. Any loan payments, because you're gonna have principal versus interest, okay? And you might have just interest expense as a bucket, or you might have it based on each individual loan, okay? Lines of credit, principal versus interest, it's going to be there. You could have it for car payments, principal versus interest. If you have home office deductions, you might put in the utility bill and then split it based on the percentage. But you can split anything based on what it is. So you guys had asked, like, if I go to the store, I went to Amazon, I spent 128 bucks, but it wasn't all business. This is how you split that transaction. Okay. Now it will not let you, like, if you split the transaction and only put $100 in, it says there is a difference of 28.48, and it will not allow you to go on from this screen until you zero this transaction out and it balances. Okay. If for some reason you put more than it's supposed to, it's going to tell you it's wrong, and it's still not going to let you do it. Okay. If you need more than 2 lines, you can click add lines to get the data that you need here. Okay. You can upload attachments here. You need to upload a receipt because you wanted to prove that only X was personal and X was business. Okay. but that's how you do it. Any questions about split transactions? James says, what is split is for two different funders? You wouldn't be able to do that if you have a transaction that you're trying to split, you would have a total dollar amount here based on one supplier that you paid. If you're trying to put multiple transactions into one activity, that would be different. So James, let me know if that answers your question. Joseph, we haven't talked about tags, so we're not going to worry about that right now. It says, do you split out sales tax paid on personal transactions in Amazon? Example. I do not. Some people do if they're like considered sales tax exempt for majority of their items. I personally am not, so it just is part of the cost of doing business or making the purchase because I pay sales tax no matter where I go. Okay, perfect. So we are right at this part where we want to take our first break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break right here. I will stop sharing my screen. And then I know that Gwen put a timer up for us last time. Gwen, if you would put that up. And then when we get back, we're going to talk about entering bills, paying bills, and those types of things. Okay, guys? So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, guys, we're going to jump back in. So it looks like over our short break, we have a couple questions. So I want to make sure we kind of review those questions. It's David said, are you going to show how to use the receipt screen with bill and pay matching? We actually show the receipt screen on the last training seminar. So we will talk about it, not today so much, David, but it will be on the next training seminar next week. So Greg says if you use business first personal and you put some business expenses on personal, it's only a few. Should you put that card in QuickBooks or just add a receipt? So I would recommend just adding the receipts, Greg, unless that's going to become something that you're going to use more frequently. Do the journal entry or add the receipt just for those transactions instead of syncing a bunch of your personal data to be mixed in. So you should be reconciling all your bank accounts, credit cards, lines of credit, loans. And if you have like investors, those types of things, all that stuff should be reconciled. You don't need to reconcile your equity accounts every month. So if you're paying a vendor as a prepaid for a future service, how do you enter that? You enter it as a credit, and we talk about that on the next session as well. Okay, so it looks like I answered all the questions. So let's dive back in. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Okay, so we're going to talk about bills. Okay, this is not a feature that every single person might use. This is a feature, though, that is a necessary thing that QuickBooks does. Okay, so if you're in the basic subscription of QuickBooks, the self-employed, you might not even have access to this feature. We are doing training in the middle of the road feature, so we do have access to this feature. Okay, so what would be entering a bill? So some of us, younger generation, myself included, Don't enter bills a lot because we pay them as soon as we get them and then they clear your bank account. Okay. So when the transaction comes through your bank account, you categorize it. That's good enough for you. And we go from there. Okay. Then there are some people that maybe don't pay vendors or suppliers for 30 days, or maybe get a bill but haven't even received the product. So you're not going to pay them until you receive the product. Okay. That would be a situation where you want to enter a bill. Okay. The reason for that is you're waiting a time frame to pay it. And so you want to keep tabs on how much money do you have going out over a specific amount of time that you might be sitting on. Okay. So that's going to be what we do. So in order to do that, you're going to go over here in our black navigation bar that we use a lot and go to expenses. And then you're going to go to bills. Now, QuickBooks is working on the ability to automatically debit funds from your account and pay them directly to another user. Okay. Feature does work. It is a free feature to use. It has thresholds and can be kind of a pain in the butt to set up. We are not going to talk about that today, as that is a feature that has just been activated in the last 30 days. However, when you get into this bill pay feature, I bring it up because it's going to prompt us to do that. Okay. So you have to go kind of the old fashioned way in order to do that. So we want to add a bill. Click this big old green button here and click add bill. Do we want to create a bill? Do we want it to be reoccurring, or do we want to upload multiple bills? I'm just going to create a bill for training purposes today. Okay. So who would be somebody that I would have a bill for? My IT firm would be somebody I would have a bill for. So ETC is my IT firm. Okay. My terms for them are net 30. They gave me a bill yesterday or on Tuesday. And so they're going to be categorized as professional fees because that's what they do for me. And the bill I got was $355.85. Okay. So this is for monthly subscriptions and tech support. That is a note for me. Okay. Now, I could then attach the invoice. Okay. So if I go into my email here and I'm going to look for ETC. I'm going to add an attachment. Oh, maybe it did not come over here. Let's see here. Downloads. Okay. It did not save. Hold on a second. Saying I have no internet connection, which we know is not true because obviously we're doing training. So let me see if it'll let me drag it. I'll drag this for training purposes, just so you guys can see it. And then we'll upload an attachment. Okay. You can also do autofill from here. Then to delete an attachment, you just delete it there. Okay. This is detail that you want to put in. You put a billing number. If there's an invoice number, that's what that is. You know, due dates, all that kind of stuff. This is how you do it. So see how it says save and schedule a payment. Scheduling a payment is using their process to do ACH. Okay. I personally want to hit save and new because we want to add another one. Okay. So another bill I might have that I don't pay regularly, like pay ACH, is going to be rent. So my landlord, and then the terms are due upon receipt. My rent is going to be due on the 1st. I'm going to categorize this as rent. And this is going to be June's rent. And I'm going to hit save and new, and we're going to add one more. FG. Again, this is due upon receipt. I'm going to do my my good old fashioned car payment here. And then I'm going to hit save and close. Okay. So now underneath bills, I have 4 review bills if you have those, unpaid bills, which is what we just entered, and then paid bills, which is where they go once you pay them. Okay. You can see the 3 bills, dollar amount gives you a grand total, and then when they're due, that type of thing. Okay. So from here, I will go into expenses and I'm going to drop this down here and I'm going to say pay bills. And that gives me the ability to select and pay the bills. Okay. Now, say for my IT guys, I don't want to pay the full bill because they're not done with the services yet. So I'm going to say I only want to pay $255 instead of $355. You can adjust that and see how it says it's a partial payment. Okay. Then it's going to tell me where do I want to pay it from. So I'm going to pay it from my operating account, and then we'll make sure that your beginning check number is accurate or click print later to get a check number later. Okay. So I don't want to print later. I'm going to say my check numbers are 3,500 is my starting number. And then from here, I'm going to hit save and print. Now, because we've never printed checks inside of QuickBooks before, it's prompting me to set up my wizard. If it just depends on if you use a voucher check, so 1 check and 2 little things, or if you have a 3-ply check. If you don't have either one of these checks and you can't actually print the checks, then you don't need to select it. So I'm going to say I'm finished with setup for this purposes at the moment. Okay, it did not. Hang on, it did not. It says the payment was made, but it didn't obviously show us what it looked like printed. Okay, to print, so I'm right. Okay. So here we want to click print checks. We want to select the proper account. And then here are the 3 checks that we just did. Then you have to do the check number again, 3,500. Make sure that's always right, by the way. And then preview and print. And then here that is what they look like. So you could actually then print and go put printer paper or check paper in your printer, or you can obviously have these as paper copies if you need it. You can download it, whichever you want, okay? And then if you hit X, it says, does your checks print correctly? I'm going to say yes for training purposes today. So now I'm all caught up. Now my check numbers are accurate from a starting point for this bank account. And you can see my bank balance changed. It's negative because we're obviously only entering expenses right now, and go from there. Now, when I did that, if I go back over here to transactions and I go into chart of accounts and I go into that actual account, here are the 3 checks we cut. So now when these 3 checks actually clear the bank account, so again, they come in through the transaction tab underneath the operating account. You can click on it and you can click match, and it will try to populate the proper transactions. Okay. Because that's a new check number we did, it doesn't match any of these check numbers. QuickBooks isn't prompted to do it. Okay. So your check number, the date the check was written, and the dollar amount need to line up in order for QuickBooks to be able to help you and say, hey, this is your car payment that you paid. Okay. So this is an area that duplicates happen. That's why I want to emphasize this. Because if this data doesn't match with what you put in, then you're going to enter this check that's here on the screen here that's synced in. And if you go into your chart of accounts here, the check is already in. Okay. So you don't need it in twice. And this is how you can see duplicates when you go to reconcile, because that would be an easy way to see, oh, I wrote 2 $625 checks, but I really only wrote 1, but my QuickBooks says I wrote 2. So not only is your bank balance wrong in QuickBooks, you've got too much expense, So some of those things are things that you have to pay attention to. Okay. Again, why we do it. So you enter a bill, categorize it when you're entering the bill. You then pay the bill and then print the checks. Not everybody uses this feature. This is an area that can cause duplicates, but it is a feature that can be really important. Now, QuickBooks Online will not, I want to repeat, QuickBooks Online will not print signatures on checks. QuickBooks Desktop does. So if you use that feature, QuickBooks Online will not do it. It has been highly requested. It has not been fixed. So they cannot print signatures on checks. Okay. So it looks like we had some questions. So let me jump over to the questions. If I work out of my home office, how do people normally approach this? So Erica, if you work home office, I tend to tell my clients to bring me all their home office expenses. So your utilities, mortgage, property tax, interest, um, minimal repairs and maintenance, and then we take it based off a percentage of your house. So if you have a 1,200 square foot house, you only use 20% of it. So 20% of your expenses are going to be written off as a home office deduction. It's not something that you necessarily track inside of QuickBooks, because obviously it's only a percentage of what you're actually spending that you actually get to write off. It is something that I do encourage people just to bring to me. So Greg says, would like to have receipts for all expenses, but I do pay some local teams or handyman's cash about $500 a year for small jobs, mowing, cleaning, painting. Do I enter this from a cash account, or does this open me up for an audit, something that I should be worried about? So Greg, good business practice. You should have a W-9, even though they're not going to be issued a tax form at the end of the year. You have your butt crossed that you have the proper documentation for somebody you've paid. Okay. If it's under $600 a year, they're issued nothing. Okay. Whether you pay them cash or card does cash, check, or card is irrelevant. They're under the threshold as long as you have the proper documentation for them. And then you can still have a receipt for them. And you can enter it as a cash account, or on the withdrawn transaction from the cash from the bank account, you could just categorize that or break that withdraw out properly to accommodate what you actually spent on cash. Erica should paying contractors go under bills? It can. It also can go under vendors, and it can also go under contractors. We don't talk about that much today. We talk about that more in the next round, but it is correct either way, because at the end of the day, when you pull a contractor report, you're pulling it by the name of the contractor. So where you put the bill in is irrelevant. So I was asked if the bill service costs something for users. That is if you do their direct ACH system. I believe there's a cost associated with it. Um, we are not going to talk about that in the training today. I just wanted everybody to know it's an option out there now. So Erica says, what if we use PayPal to pay them internationally? Is billing just for checks? Billing does not have to be just for checks. Creating a bill can be for anything that you're paying, as long as you mark it paid and put it into the proper account of where the funds are actually coming out from. If you're not physically cutting a check, the bill pay feature, meaning if you're not holding a bill for a long period of time, can be an additional step that maybe is unneeded, especially if you're already going through PayPal to make the payment. Well, PayPal is going to clear out of a bank account or a credit card. And so when that transaction clears, you could just categorize it instead of putting a bill in. Again, unless you're waiting a long period of time or they're creating invoices to you that you want to track it that way. So James says, what if you are paying from a debit card and it's the same as the printed checks? Um, that is correct. If you're paying it on a debit card, when you pay bills, you don't have to say you printed checks. You could write an ACH or debit card transaction so that when it comes through, it's still going to match when it's not looking for a check number. That's a preference up to you. Really, the check feature is because you're physically putting checks in the mailbox to go to a vendor or a supplier or handing a check to somebody. So you have a physical paper copy of something that's going on. It says, should the printable checks be provided by banks or do they cost something? That's up to you. Some banks do supply a small amount of checks. A lot of times I just see customers order them. You can either order them through Intuit, Vistaprint, or through your bank. They just have to be obviously proper check paper. Bruce says, I pay bills through my bank and they send checks out. How do I record these payments? Well, if your bank is integrated, when the check is sent out and your bank pulls the funds, you would categorize those expenses from that screen. No need to do the bill pay feature for that, Bruce. Angie said, what is the difference between a bill and an invoice? A bill is when you're paying an end user for something they did for you. An invoice is when you're receiving money from somebody for a service you offered or a product you sold. David, my contact information will be given at the end, so you can reach out directly. So Jane says, how do you handle a situation when you need to reimburse your personal credit cards for an automatic annual business transaction that initially put on your personal card because you did not have business cards yet? I would put a journal entry in or cut yourself a check and categorize it for whatever that expense is. And then obviously, as soon as that expense hits, go into the account that it hit and change that processing for your own sanity. Yes, Scott is correct. So he just wanted an FYI. You do not have to print the checks. If you have the smaller version checks, you can handwrite the checks manually and enter them into the register. This is just a feature QuickBooks offers, but it is not a requirement. Ed, it looks like there's a thing in the Q&A for you from Nicole. So James says if we split expense half in one account and the other allow account to have a balance is the if the account is listed. I'm not sure I understand that question. James, can you elaborate a little bit more? Okay. So James says if we split an expense in half is for another account and it will allow the account to balance if the account is listed. That is correct. Yes, it will allow the account to balance if it's listed. Okay, so I've gotten all of those questions. Okay. Any other questions about bills, why we enter them, printing checks? Obviously, it's not a requirement. Nadine says, is using Zelle to pay contractors allowed? Yes, you can pay your contractors however you want as long as you have the proper documentation and you're tracking the information properly. Okay, perfect. So we're going to move on. So we've been asked about copying transactions. So there's a couple ways to copy transactions. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's start with the bill pay portal that we were at first. So if you go into expenses, now you can see here are the couple things we put in. So if I click view and edit, just for example, my rent payment is something that I will pay month after month after month, okay? Down here in the middle of your screen where it says more, copy. Then you can change the date. So instead of being June, let's make it July. Down here, I can change July rent. And I can hit save and close. Now my rent is showing. It's predated for a month from now. And it's there. And then you can schedule and pay once you get to the point. Okay. So that's how you copy a bill. If you're looking at expenses, so if we go into transactions and you go into your bank account to view your register, again, Verizon Wireless would be a great one because it's my cell phone bill. Okay, and I click edit. Down here again, it says more, and I can copy, and I can change this to my bill clears on the 15th or 14th, and I can hit save. Okay. And now you'll see it shows again, predated, same dollar amount, easy way to copy. Okay. You cannot copy from the bank transaction tab. So like if you click on something in here, you can't copy it. You have to enter it and then go into the actual like into the register to then be able to create a copy. The reason for that is that none of this QuickBooks doesn't think any of this data that's populating in this for review tab should need to be copied because it's real life data. Meaning these transactions are populating within a day or two of you actually swiping the card. For example, today is the 8th. The 7th was yesterday, and it put a transaction that hit in the account on the 7th. Okay. All right, let's talk about invoicing. So, invoicing is when we are requesting to be paid for a service or product we sold. Okay. Invoicing is an area that we get to create a lot of customization features. Books Online is not 100% customizable, but the invoice is pretty basic looking and is going to help us. Okay. So I'm going to remind us in the gear icon, if we go under accounts and settings, what you have in here is what's going to populate on your invoice. So you could put a logo, have a name, have an address, you have an email address, your phone number, you can put your website. Okay. You're going to have payment information. If you set up payment processing, this will populate through your invoice. Okay. And then you might have the ability to do different currencies and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So all these play in our initial setup to invoicing. We're going to use our black navigation bar. Okay. We go to sales. We want to go to invoices. And again, we have a lot of wizards right now because we've never done this before. Okay. We're going to create an invoice. I'm going to show you what the PDF view looks like. So it's a very generic, basic invoice. Okay. Now you can manage this and go to customization and change things that you want. You can look at the design, you can change the color. It's up to you. Okay. The options are there. So if we go back to edit, so we're going to invoice a customer. So who would be a customer to me? So let's do it. Canton Score is a customer to me. Okay. So I'm going to put in, you could put in email addresses, you could put in phone numbers. If you're going to email it, you could put in email, additional things for people that need to be on the emails as well. You can put an address. We're going to 123 Canton Avenue for training purposes. Obviously, that's going to be Canton, Ohio, 4431 702. Here we go. You can put notes. You can attach their tax exempt form, W-9s in here. Any of the forms you might have paperwork wise. You could set up payment things in here if you're going to keep credit cards on file, how they're going to pay. Here's exemption details. You got to put that tax number in there. Okay. You can hit save. I don't personally work in an industry that has sales tax. So I don't have sales tax on my services right now. So I don't need to worry about some of those things. Okay. But the services that I do are payroll. So payroll is new. So let's hit add new. It is a service I offer. I don't need a description. The rate's going to vary. And then I will want to see this under payroll income because I like to see how much money I make on that service. And then I hit save and close. Okay. So now I have payroll. So now I could put, because payroll is always a month in the rear. So this would be April's payroll processing. And then I usually put the dates. So for example, it's a biweekly payroll for April. So I would go like the 4th and 18th. And then so that's 2 payrolls at $50 a payroll. So $100 is my cost. Again, training purposes here. I'm going to hit review and send. Your invoice is ready, $100. Now I didn't put any email addresses in here, but I can from this screen as well. I can send myself a copy. You can change any of this information in here to type a little message if you want it to be individualized, or it's just the generic template and you can click send. Now, if you go back into your sales tab, now you've created an invoice. Again, invoices can be copied. So if you click edit and review, more actions, make a copy and change the date. I can change my terms. So say this is training. So I need to add a training module because that's again a service I offer and I would want to know what my training module is. So for revenue purposes for me. And then QB training 2025. And then I would put May. And then it's 4 sessions at whatever the cost is for session. We'll do $25 for training purposes today, obviously. And then we can hit instead of save and send, share a link, or we can save a new if we need to create a new customer, save and close. Again, go back to your sales tab over here, underneath invoices, they're here, okay? So if somebody, if you want to not click into an invoice and make a copy, if you click this down here, you can click duplicate. And it's going to create the invoice again, and you can hit save and close. And now I have 3 invoices here, okay? When a customer pays you, you have to go into this bucket here, so sales under invoices and hit receive payments. Tell it where to deposit the money, how you got paid, put a reference number, select the proper invoice. So we have more than one invoice for this customer, right? And then you hit save and close. Now it says it was deposited. Now the items that we're invoicing for, those are things that we're creating because we're working on building that right now because we don't have it anywhere else, right? So if for some reason you're in an industry that your pricing doesn't vary or it's not based on project, and so you know that you're going to sell purse and you have 100 purses in stock and you know they're going to go for $55 a piece, okay? You can set up that product be that dollar amount based on a SKU code or a name, whatever it is for you, okay? So where is that data held? That data is held under products and services. So you can see we created payroll, we created training, QuickBooks automatically created a service one. You can make the service one inactive. Nope, it won't let me make it inactive. They must have that one where you have to use it. Okay. Now you can import from here too, batch import a bunch. So if you had used a different accounting software, you can port it out and port it in to save yourself from manually entering it. Obviously you can create it here. Just depends on whether you're doing service, inventory, if you have bundles, those types of things. And then where this data goes is the mapping part of it. Okay. So I'm going to do service and I'm going to put in contract labor. So a lot of us in construction fields or various industries will have people that you bill their time into your jobs to get recoup your cost, okay? And you might call that contractor labor or labor cost in general, okay? The labor cost to you is revenue coming in, and then when you pay the direct person that actually did the labor, that's the expense to you. Some people would in the income account contract labor as the expense. You can do that, or you could have an income account for contract labor and then have the expenses come out and you can make sure you're making money on it. That's up to you. But you are able underneath where it says income account to select an expense account if you wanted to offset somewhere. QuickBooks will give you a warning. So for example, oh, it didn't give it to me. It will give you a warning that you're selecting an account that's not an income account. So for example, we decided, we don't want contract labor to be that way. So we want to edit it. So we want contractor income as a new account. And then we can save it. Now, if, like I said, if we want to sell purses, so let's do a non-inventory part. Well, let's call it a purse. The SKU, say, is 1005. We don't need a category. And this is the 2025 purse collection. And these are going to be priced at 55 per. And service income is fine for this. And we'll save and close. So now let me go to create an invoice. And I'm going to say and sharp. And we want this to be purse. So now you can see all that data we filled in came in. So if I bought 5 of them, you can see it factors everything. And then save and close. So black bar sales, you're going to play in the invoice bucket. And then you're also going to manage the products and services. Okay. Now it looks like we have some questions. So let's jump over to questions. So Gwen says expense report payments should be listed as the employee name as the account vendor and the right expense account, correct? Gwen, I'm not sure I understand your question. Priscilla, we talk about reoccurring transactions next class. Scott says, have you used the autofill? Scott, I have used the autofill. It doesn't populate the data properly. And I notice when you have the autofill that it doesn't, when you load a new attachment, it doesn't change that one. So it's a great feature. I'm sure they'll continue building it out, but it doesn't work properly at the moment that I've had experience with. Tammy says, can you make QuickBooks use the same numbers for customer quotes and invoices? Tammy, if you do an estimate and you flip the estimate to an invoice, it does use the same number. Just doesn't say ES, I believe, for estimate. But inside of QuickBooks, if you create an estimate, once they've approved the estimate, you can flip it to an invoice and it is the same. Mm. James says, can you enter an expense that is not from any of the accounts listed, even if it's old? You can, you would do it as a journal entry because if it's not from any of the accounts you have synced in, you would have to be able to pull it from owner's funds, or shareholder distributions, or equity, and then put it against whatever it should be categorized as. David says we are COD, so we have been using Quicken. Would I need to go back and enter all the jobs? That's a preference for you. It's not a requirement by any means, as long as the revenue is tied somewhere. There would be a benefit if you're switching from Quicken to QuickBooks to do so. But it does not have to be done, David. If you want to talk on more of a personalized basis after training today, feel free to reach out with my contact information that's given, and we can dive into that a little bit more. So Greg says if you have some business expenses um, on personal credit cards, should you track it? Should you not? Uh, Greg, if you have no intention on using the card again for business expenses, then I would not put it into QuickBooks and only enter the few business expenses in as journal entries, which we will talk about next class. If you intend to use it for business use moving forward, then yes, you would want to integrate it. But you don't want to try not to intermix the usage so that you have a ton of personal flowing all over the place as well. Um, so it's an internal preference for you. So David, I would probably recommend then, since you're only about 4 months into 2025, if you wanted to do it, I would probably do it if it was me. So that my 2025 was accurate with history from clients, because I don't know when you close Quicken what you're going to have and not have, other than what you can port out. So it says, can you explain the product type of inventory versus non-inventory part? Uh, that is the way QuickBooks does it. There really isn't, if you look here and you create new, there isn't an inventory. I mean, a bundle might be considered inventory, but as you can see here, they don't offer an inventory. So if you're doing a product or service, I put it under service. If it's might be you actually housing inventory, I would do a non-inventory part. QuickBooks Online does not do a good job of tracking inventory, fixed assets, those types of things in general. Um, because it's a basic platform, not like desktop where it's robust. So that's why you don't see that. I always recommend tracking your inventory in an Excel doc, Google Doc, somewhere else, and then obviously doing the adjustments inside of QuickBooks as needed quarterly, annually for tax purposes. So Tammy, you do the payment the same way. So if you go under invoices, you still click receive payment. You can make this ACH and you can set it up so you have an ACH option. You don't have to have a reference number if you don't want, and then just tell it which account it deposited to, and you can still mark it as paid. Nicole, can you give me a little bit more detail for yours? It says, what do you do if you have the DCAA compliance for government contracts? And how would you track subcontractors? Is that different? Tammy says when she flips an estimate to an invoice, it doesn't have the same number. Tammy, then I would override that and change the invoice number because you can do that. So it says my client pays 80% of the charges prior to the service rendered and 20% after the service is complete. What is the best way to manage the invoice process? I would create the invoice for its full value and mark it partially paid. So when you click receive payments, only pay 80% of that invoice so that you show an open balance on what's remaining. And when you finish the service, you know exactly what you're going to collect versus creating two invoices. Okay, perfect. So it looks like we're through all of those questions. Okay, so we're going to take our second little brief break before we jump into our next set of categories that we're going to work on. We're going to take let's make this one 13 minutes. We'll come back right at 11, and then we'll power out the last hour for the last section. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat while we're on our little short break, and then we'll be back at 11, guys. I'm going to get back into it here. So I am going to talk about matching transactions. Okay. So matching transactions is a couple things. So if you have an invoice inside of QuickBooks, when you mark that invoice paid and it was a check, and you go to your bank account and you make that deposit, okay? We don't always take one check to the bank. We might take two or three checks. Okay. So when you make that deposit might be for a total of $50,000, but maybe you marked two invoices paid for 25,000 each. Okay. So when you marked that invoice paid, you took in that revenue on your financial statement. Then you went to the bank and you made that deposit. Okay. So it's going to come through on the transaction screen from all the stuff that's being imported from your bank account. Okay. So if you don't match them together to become one transaction, you have $50,000 in duplicate revenue. Okay. So when you mark it paid and then you go and make the deposit, when the deposit shows on QuickBooks, you then have to tell QuickBooks what to do with it so that it doesn't have a duplicate transaction. Okay. So I'm going to do a couple things to force this to happen. So I'm going to go into my bank registration or register. And I'm going to go ahead and make a deposit here. And I'm going to date this 5/7 of 25. And I'm going to say we got 40235. And I'm going to call this payroll income. And let me shrink this down just so I can see my save button. Okay. And then now if I go back to my transaction tab, you'll see here's a deposit, 40235, but see how it's trying to say it's sales. That's the way that it would be considered duplicate revenue if I added this as sales. So what I would need to do is I need to click on this and I need to click match. And then you can see the deposit that I made for 40235. It's going to match to, and I can click match. Now the transaction's gone here, right? If I go to my bank register and I filter these by date, I only have one transaction for 40235. So they merged into one. I entered it. It was coming from my bank feed and I told it to be one transaction. Okay. So this matters if you invoice. If you do not invoice, then when the revenue is deposited into the account, you can just categorize it. Okay. Now this is on the opposite side too, from an expense perspective. If you enter an expense, like you printed checks and then the checks clear, you need to make sure that they're not populating twice. Obviously, it's really easy to see when you would have duplicate check numbers, right? So you do the same type of thing. I entered a check. I made it 12/45. So I'm going to add another one. Let's do a check. We're going to date this 2/2/25. The check number is 1232. It went to BFG for 625 for the key loan. I'm going to hit save. Okay. So now I have entered these two checks. So then if we go back over here to transactions and we search for training purposes, because it's going to be easier because it's not going to populate right at the top. Here's check number 1245. It's trying to put it in wages and salaries, which is not what it is at all. Okay. So I have to open it, clicking on it. I need to click match. And then it matches. This is dated 4/11. Ignore the date. The date would obviously usually be closer, but because I just entered it. But what matters is that the check number and the dollar amount matches. Check number, dollar amount matches. Okay. Down here, there says there's no difference. So then you can click match. So now I've taken the one from this screen and it's disappeared. As you can see, there's nothing to search. Okay. And I'm going to go to my bank register. I'm going to use my filter here to search again. And you can see there's only one check in here. Now, again, if you don't enter your checks, either using the bill pay because you're printing them or as a manual transaction, there's nothing to match. But if you enter them in here when they sync in because they've actually cashed, is when you need to make sure that it doesn't become two transactions. It stays as one. Okay. Let's do another one. We entered check number 1232. So let's search here for training purposes for 1232. Here it is. See how it says match found? So this one was close enough in date, close enough in vendor, and the check number matched that it's trying to match it for you. I always open it just to double check. Again, the date's not perfect because I just picked a date when I entered the check number, but we are going to do it. But sometimes QuickBooks catches it and tells you to match, and sometimes you have to force it through. Same goes for the revenue side. Sometimes it's going to catch it. Sometimes you're going to have to force it through. So again, this prompted it. This is what we want it to do. We want it to, again, select match. It's now come out of my for review transaction. I can now go into my bank register and look for the check number, 1232. There's only one. Okay. Now, you can see here that some of these items don't have anything in this column and some of them do. Okay. If they don't have anything in their column, it's because you manually entered them. Now we manually entered this check, but I matched it to a transaction that came through from the bank account. So it has the symbol that it's been added from a bank feed. Okay. So this is a really easy way to see if your stuff is matching properly too, because you, in reality, when this check clears, it should come out of the bank account and there should be a bubble here. If there's not a square, double square here and a C, then odds are it's a duplicate. You can also see this information when you're in the reconciliation screen. So if I click reconcile and I go $1 just for training purposes, I'm going to do it as of today. You can see which transactions came from the bank account and which ones you maybe manually entered. So if you do find out that there is a duplicate, you need to decide if you're going to enter it from the bank account, assuming the categorization is proper, or if you're going to select the one that you would have manually entered yourself and then delete the other one. Now you can delete data from here. So if you click on this, you can click edit, more, delete. And it brings you back into your reconciliation screen. So if you find a duplicate while reconciling or while matching, you can delete it immediately so you don't forget about it. Okay. Do we understand matching transactions and how they could really mess up our QuickBooks? Looks like we have a couple questions. Hey, Nicole, I saw you answered some more about the government contracts. Why don't we connect privately about that? Because there's some in and outs with that I don't have time to teach during training today. When you create a customer invoice, does it put that invoice into a chart of accounts, example of account, receivable accounts, or money owed to us? Yes, it automatically puts money into accounts receivable. That is an account that is automatically created in your QuickBooks. And then obviously when you mark it paid, it either goes into your bank account or into undeposited funds, Gwen. Angie, I'm not sure I understand your question. You're asking how to link invoice payments from different vendors into specific sales sub accounts, i.e. sales and everything else. If you're paying a vendor, that would be under your cost of goods sold or overhead expenses based on whatever bucket you have categorized, not necessarily in your invoice. One says if you make a deposit into the bank before you've marked it the invoice paid in QuickBooks, can you link it backwards? Yes, you can. So when for that, if you go, you're in your transactions and let's find bank transactions and let's find another deposit here. So you would still click the match screen. And then any invoices that you have opened, you can filter it by open invoices, payments received. Obviously, if you hadn't received the payment, you would click open invoices. All your open invoices that would be up to that dollar amount will populate here, and then you would select them just like you selected the payment. So Jane says, how do you open the check? Okay. So if you are in your transaction tab, and we're going to go down here to a check. So this is a check. So you just click anywhere on it to get this gray box to open it. If you're in the actual bank register, and you find a check, you still just click on it to open it. And then you can click edit to get it to open for more detail here. But you just click on them to be able to open them. So Greg says, is there any problems deleting items? I remember in the past you had to reverse out a transaction. So in QuickBooks Online, you don't need to do the reverse activity. It does it automatically. So for example, if I take this check here that we entered, see how it has the C and it's linked to the bank account, and I click on it and I click delete. Okay, this is check number 1245. I then go back to my transaction tab and I'm going to search 1245. There's the check. Okay. So if it's something that's linked to the bank account to the integration feature and you delete it, it's going to come back into the for review tab. Okay. If it's something you manually entered and you delete, it'll be gone. It does not go anywhere because you manually entered the data. If you import the data and you delete it, it will come back to the for review tab because you've imported it. It's only if you're manually in the register entering a transaction and you click delete will it not come back. So if you delete it in purpose and you want it to really be gone, you would click this and you want to click exclude. So it doesn't sit in your for review tab, it doesn't get categorized, it sits over here. Out of your way, doesn't impact your financials, doesn't populate anywhere. we assume it's a duplicate at that point. If a transaction of deposit is made in the bank account and the deposit is from two different clients, can you split the payment with two different clients? Yes. Again, if you have invoicing, when you click that match feature, you can select more than one item. If you don't do invoicing, then you can still split it by clicking the split transaction. So let's click out of here. Let's go find another deposit. So if I click here, split transaction, and then I can say money from Steve, and then I can say payroll income, payroll from Kathy, whomever. $50 here, 275 here. If you need it to be matched, and again, you need it from more than one person, let me see if I can find a deposit that is less than $100, since that's what we created all our invoices for. So if I click here, I want to click match. And I want to say open invoices through today to make so it populates. It's not going to do it for me. Let me try again. Match. So here's the two open invoices. So I can say I want this deposit, but it's $100. There's no difference, and I can click match. And that's how I would select an invoice to be paid from the bank feed. Okay, it looks like I've answered all of those questions about matching transactions. Okay, matching transactions is the hardest part of QuickBooks Online, if you want my professional opinion. It is the area that I see the most when it comes to people being like, wow, I didn't make that much money. It's pretty easy to find because you have a bunch of stuff left in your reconciliation screen, which when you're done with your reconciliation screen, you shouldn't have very much left in there. Maybe checks that haven't cleared, but anything else should really be cleaned out. And those types of things. So it's definitely an area to really pay attention to, that we definitely want to watch, and then obviously make sure that we clean it up. Again, pay attention to which ones are synced versus which ones were manually entered, and make sure you're selecting the proper thing when you're doing the reconciliation. Okay. Now we're going to talk about vendors and customers, and then we're going to talk about editing items. So underneath sales, you're going to see customers. So customers is anybody that you're selling your product and service to. Okay. You could have a ton of customers, you could have very few customers, just depends on your business. Honestly, I even have some companies that have so many customers that every once in a while they get somebody that just walks in the door. When they walk in the door, they call them walk-in instead of getting all their customer information. If you do that, that's great. Downfall is if you ever wanted a customer list, obviously you're missing their information. But that just depends on what you're doing product and service wise. Okay. You obviously can create a new customer from here, fill out all information above. You can also import customers. You can do it from a Google Sheet. You can do it from an Excel document based on format. Okay. There are now customer requests. This is a new bucket. Okay. Customer requests now, they are trying to streamline businesses that use QuickBooks Online. So if you are working with another company that has QuickBooks Online, when you create the invoice, it is prompting you to send a request so that you have all their information from their QuickBooks in yours. And then obviously it helps keep the information updated, and you're like basically friends inside of QuickBooks. You can see when we do certain things, like for example, if I create Like you type in anything, it's automatically trying to figure out other Sculpt LLCs that are in QuickBooks. And you could select any of them. And then it's going to fill out all the information for you. Now, once they accept your request, the dots will go away and you will actively be able to see this person. Okay. And you can hit send and save. I don't want to do that because I don't know who this customer is, obviously. But you don't have to follow through with it. Okay. If you edit a customer, so for example, if I edit Ann Sharp, you click on it, click edit, and then again, you get the same module to do any of the information. If you edit a customer though, and then you go back and you copy a pre-existing invoice, your edits are not going to show on that copy. Meaning, when you copy or duplicate the invoice that has the old address or old email or old customer name, when you copy it, the new stuff you've entered in here is not going to populate. Why? I have zero idea, but it does keep that as a record. So once you've edited a customer's address or something, you need to create a new invoice. And then from there, you can copy that invoice to make sure your data stays accurate. Okay. Inside of here, the other thing is the products and services, which we briefly talked about. Okay. These are going to be constantly changing. Again, you can import. I'm going to click a new one. I want to click into services, and another service that I offer is bookkeeping. And I'm going to call this package income because my bookkeeping stuff, it tends to be a package. Okay. And you see all these layers of things that QuickBooks is allowing us to go through and do, right? To set up in order to have the one item I needed on the previous screen to then make another item on the previous screen, right? Now, my bookkeeping services are sub packages. I have a monthly package, a quarterly package, a semi-annual, and an annual package. So you can determine what those are based on pricing. And again, that varies a little bit. So I can always hit edit and say, "Oh, I'm doing a 10% price increase." So if my price was 350 per month, I can times 10% plus 350, and I now get, oh, it's not gonna let me do it. Let's see here. 350 times 0.1. We'll do that one. Nope. All right. So 350 plus 35 is 385. Okay, is our new rate. So I've edited it. Now it has a price. So you can see the price. Okay. You can put a cost associated with it for you if you want to know what your markup is. Again, your cost is probably changing as frequent as the market or product is changing right now. So that's the benefit of being able to have the edit feature. If you do a service call and your service call pricing is going up year after year, again, you can do the edit from inside of here. That's the important part about the edit feature. You can change where this revenue is going. If you decide, oh, I don't want it to be separate from bookkeeping versus training versus whatever, I just want everything to be in a sales bucket, I can edit where it's going. So you can click edit, change it here. You're just looking for income accounts is what I'm looking for to teach your eyes. So here's all my income accounts. I just wanted to say sales. Now to go back to customers briefly, you can also export a customer list based on detail. Okay. You can export it into Excel. So you can use it for labels, you can use it for mailing. So it's going to be kind of nice because if you don't have a CRM, you can utilize QuickBooks to be somewhat of a CRM for you for customers. Okay. Again, you can house tax exempt certificates, all the paperwork that you could ever need on a client, you can load into the individual clients as attachments and keep it all in one house. It's just a nice place to have it digitally on top of having paper forms as well. Okay. So the biggest question I get when it comes to customers and vendors is can they be the same person? QuickBooks Online does not allow you to have a customer that is also a vendor. Although we know that we have customers that are also vendors. It doesn't allow you to have Ann Sharp as a customer and Ann Sharp as a vendor. Okay. You can have Ann Sharp as a customer and then Ann M Sharp as a vendor. Okay. But you have to change something as long with the name so that it'll allow you to add both. Okay. So our vendors are then under expenses where you have vendors right here. And a vendor is going to be anybody you pay. It's going to be the Chipotle's, the McDonald's, actual professional fees, attorneys, Salon Posh, any of the people that you actually pay money to, whether it's swiping a debit card, cutting a check, entering a bill, print, any of these things. It's whoever you pay. Okay. Your vendor information may or may not be detailed like it is with uh, employees or with customers, meaning like I don't have an address for Amazon. I don't have a phone number for Amazon. I don't have an address for McDonald's. I don't have a phone number for McDonald's, right? Like that, these are more high level things. That doesn't mean that you won't have vendor details. We just don't for some of them. Okay. Now, can you have a vendor be a contractor? The answer is yes, you can. Technically, if you set up a vendor, so if I go here and hit edit, and I say that this vendor needs to track for 1099s, it's going to automatically put this vendor in your contractor list. It might not show on the contractor tab inside of QuickBooks, but it puts you on a list so that when you go to generate these forms at the end of the year, they populate inside those forms. Okay. And then obviously you can keep their business ID, keep their W-9, all that kind of stuff. It tells you where you want to send their stuff when you're doing it because now they're getting tracked for taxes. Okay. But you can set up vendors as contractors as well here. They will still show in your vendor list, but they also will show in your contractor list. That's it's an internal thing pending what you're trying to do. Okay. Again, you can import vendors. If you know you have a bunch that you want to do, you're going to get the same import options, Excel sheet or Google sheet. If you open multiple companies that you use the same suppliers, you obviously, this is what you would want to do to save yourself the headache of entering everything over and over again. You can also make them inactive. So you can't select that vendor anymore. So if for some reason you find yourself having duplicate vendors, you obviously can make it inactive to try to keep your list clean. You also can allow your inactive ones to be shown in your list. They just say deleted next to them in case you think you need to make them reactive. Okay. From inside of here, you can say create a bill with your vendors and it'll bring you to the bill pay. It brings up whatever the bill was that you just created. So I'm not copying anything from that supplier, but it knows that the last bill I created for BFG was this. So it's going to bring up the pre-data. So again, streamlining what you've already done in the past. Only time obviously this stinks is that if you pay a supplier for material, it might not be the same dollar amount every single time you open it. Okay. It does it for all. Amazon, same way. Amazon came up with nothing because we've never created a bill for it. You can again port this out just like you can customers. So if you ever wanted to just do a spot check review, see how many duplicates you have. I tend to see duplicates happen with vendors when you go to multiple Wendy's, but they're not coded the same on the back end. Because, the Wendy's in New Philly, Ohio, and the Wendy's in Washington, D.C. are going to be owned by two different people. Although it says Wendy's, their credit card processing probably has two different names on the back end. And so that's when you can start to have duplicate vendors. QuickBooks also will notice every once in a while that you do have duplicate vendors or customers, and it will ask you to merge them together. Okay. Merging them together is nice. It makes sure that all the history is there between both. I see that a lot when you move from desktop to QuickBooks Online. That desktop allows you to have on both sides. QuickBooks Online doesn't, and it's a catch safe to get you to merge together. It warns you before it does that. Okay. Any questions about vendors, customers, or our items? It looks like we do have a few questions, so. Says, is it common to have a customer's W-9 too? No, not necessarily. They would want your W-9. Really what you would have from a customer is gonna be the exempt form if you do sales tax. So Bruce says, I have a customer with about 20 or more shipping and billing people. How do I manage this under the same company name? Uh, when you say 20 or more, are there 20 or more people you need to actually send the invoices to, or just people that you could potentially talk with? And what I would do if it was me under new customer, like you could have a generic phone number and who you might supposed to be to talk with. Obviously, you could put more than one email in the CC and BCCs. But I would put all of that information probably down in notes. So and so for this department, so and so for this, so and so for this, and then obviously put phone numbers. Bruce, if it was me. That's a lot of people to be managing it, but obviously companies are big and it takes a lot of hands sometimes. Yes. Jane said, would a credit card company or telephone carrier be a vendor? Yes, that is correct. Verizon would be considered a vendor. James says, what version of QuickBooks is this? This is the Essentials version. So we're one step up from the bottom. It's the $65 a month one. It says, does it matter if these common chain stores are vendors to be entered? So QuickBooks Online is really great with keeping detailed transactions. So for example, to answer this a little bit easier, if you go down here and you look at like bill and pay, okay, I could say this is payroll processing and I can hit confirm, okay? And then I'm going to go over to my bank register and I'm going to show you what that looks like when I get here, okay? So I'm looking for the payroll processing. So see here, I don't have who I paid. I just have payroll processing. So it creates holes in your data if you needed to look backwards. However, if you open it, there is detail from it being synced from the bank account that stays inside of here. QuickBooks Desktop does not keep it. QuickBooks Online does. So you could then go in and backtrack. So is it the end of the world if you do not put a payee? No. But when you go to look at your financials, which we'll look at in just a second, it may create holes that you don't know what the data is because when you look at a financial, you're not seeing a payee. You got to look at the detail. Okay. Joe says, can you integrate with other CRMs like Salesforce? The answer is yes. QuickBooks integrates with a ton of other platforms. We don't spend a lot of time talking about integration because it's kind of one-on-one basis. And sometimes you need a bridge software in between. It's not my area of expertise, but I do know for a fact that it does integrate with Salesforce. Yes. Bruce said it's both to ship and send bills to via email. So yeah, I would put as many email addresses in the CC and BCC as you can, Bruce, and then I would just list them below so you have a place to pull them when you need it as far as sending them. You can put more than one invoice in as long as you put the proper punctuation between them, they'll be active emails. Hey Ed, there's another one that said they missed the first training and they were looking for some detail. Can you follow up with that for me?
Yeah, I thought after all the questions are answered, I could ask you to go to score.org and I can walk them through the process. Can
Perfect,
you
perfect.
up for that?
Yep,
All right,
that's perfect. We
all
should
right,
have a few minutes to do that, no problem.
all right.
So it says, how about different Wendy's and different locations as vendors should be entered as different vendors? You want to try to use them all under as Wendy's. They just don't all come through as Wendy's. And if you have a rule created like we talked about, the rule is not going to populate unless you have multiple rules for the vendor Wendy's. But you can have one vendor as Wendy's as long as you spell it Wendy's like you have listed there and not Wendy or Wendy's without an apostrophe. It would just have to be spelled exactly the same so it doesn't create a duplicate account. Katrina's asking if it integrates with Vargo. I do not know. I have not heard of Vargo. You can look inside of QuickBooks here, this 9 icon thing at the top gives you the ability to find apps to determine what integrates and what doesn't inside of QuickBooks. David's asking you which version of QuickBooks is best. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I start little and move up. For training purposes, we're doing the middle of the road because we don't need all the bells and whistles, but we need enough bells and whistles to activate like the bill pay portal and things like that. Um, but I do think based on size of business and what you're trying to accomplish, that if you don't need some of those features, that the basic level might be sufficient. So I want to go backwards to one last question up here. So Angie asked, how do you write off expenses without payment? So Angie, I'm assuming you're talking about bad debt. So when we talk about invoices, um, pending what you're selling or doing, when somebody doesn't pay you, we need to zero that invoice out. And how we can do that is I prefer to use the void button. The void button will zero the invoice out. Therefore, it doesn't show in your sales number. But our time is not necessarily deductible as owners. Where this is a catch 22 is if you paid for a product, so the inventory that you're selling, and somebody took it and didn't pay you, right? You already incurred the costs you can by purchasing the initial item that was for sale. Okay. So there is no additional loss on that item just because you didn't get to mark it up and sell it. You just obviously don't have any revenue for it. Okay. If I do a service for bookkeeping and they don't pay me, I don't get to write off my time for that, just zero out the invoice because there is no cost associated with my service unless I have a software implemented or something, but I don't usually, or I already have all that fee covered elsewhere. So I just void it, and that's the deduction you get. So the reason I choose to void versus delete is I want to know which customers didn't pay me. So there's a couple ways to do it. So if you click on here, click on this open invoice we have. I want to actually view the invoice. So you can create an item called bad debt. And I'm going to call this discounts. And then you can negative out this invoice. Okay. So it's taking it off your sales number. Or if you go back to sales, you can delete that line item. And under more actions, you can click void. It says voided here. The detail of what I was trying to sell is there, purse, right? And I can see. I don't see how much I lost by doing a void versus the bad debt line. So it's a preference to you on which one you decide to do. But that's how you do. You zero out the invoice that you know you're not going to get paid for once the collection period has gone to what you think it's deemed it as uncollectible. Okay. But there's no additional money you get to write off other than zeroing the invoice, and then you already paid for the product to sell, so you already got that deduction when you made that purchase. So it says for this feature, can it be used for legal action to pursue payment? I would probably try to do legal action to pursue payment or a collection agency prior to voiding the invoice. Voiding the invoice or putting it as bad debt is just a way to get it off your books. I'm by no means an attorney, so I can't really give you any more guidance than that. But if it was me, I would try to do everything I can to collect prior to actually getting it off your books. Because if you get it off your books and then you were to be paid for it, then you have to obviously add it back in. David, I don't do anything with Google Workspace. I'm a Microsoft 360 myself, so I sadly can't give you more detail to that. But I don't do anything in Google for financial reasons. So okay. So believe I have answered all the questions. Okay. So I want to talk about, so the next class we have is our last class. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second so I can pull up our PowerPoint here. So our last class is the expert class, and we are going to be talking about the last few things to roundabout training. So we're going to work on project costing, editing accounts. We're going to work on sub accounts. We're going to talk about the contractors and payroll briefly. We'll look at budgeting, some miscellaneous tools. We definitely talk about reoccurring transactions. We're going to look at all our lists. We're going to talk about classes. We're going to talk about receipts, sales tax portal, those types of things. So we have a lot of miscellaneous tools inside of QuickBooks that some will take advantage of and some won't. That's going to be our high level overall class. Next time we have the basic framework now down to then do all these additional items as we go. And then I want to go ahead and give you guys the contact information for today.
Yeah, there are two more classes actually. Next week is the advanced, and the following week is for nonprofits.
Yes, that is correct. I hadn't gotten
Oh,
that far.
okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yep, nope, you're good. Don't worry about it. So here is my contact information. If you guys need anything, feel free to reach out to me directly. If for some reason you don't have my contact information when this is all said and done, you can always reach out to Canton Score. They'll be happy to connect us as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you ready to do the score.org now, Ann?
Yes, we can absolutely do the score.org now.
Okay. Okay.
I was just making sure we had no more questions, but it didn't look like we had anything else in Q&A. Okay. It doesn't look like it, Ed, so we can go ahead and do the score.
Okay. It's just score.org.
Here. Score.org.
Yeah. Okay. And let's see. Workshops and events, recorded webinars, And if you scroll, if you do any location, eventually, let's just scroll down. These are everything that's recorded. I think we should be finance. I'm looking for last week's beginners.
You
I
know,
guess we
I
could have
think,
probably
excuse me, Ed, I
yes,
think
there
we
it
would
is.
go directly to it if we would do score.org/Canton.
Okay, I was just making it as simple as I can. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Recorded workshops. If you do click on workshops, it'll show you what you can register for. Other workshops were so right there's the beginners QuickBooks that we did last week. So you just click on it, and you can view what we talked about last week. So I don't know what it's doing there. I
Once
think
you
it's
register for the event, did I do the wrong button? Maybe I have to click just up here.
No, you did the right one, and
Okay.
it does
yeah,
request
view
that you
webinar.
register. Yeah,
It's probably making you register before it'll give it to you, probably, I'm guessing.
that is correct. Yeah.
So that way we gotcha. No. Yeah, we could probably put maybe Gwen, we could put a couple slides together with some screenshots of this because a lot of people are asking about it. Maybe we can incorporate it into the PowerPoint somehow. But all right,
It's a good
all right,
idea. Yeah.
yeah, all right, gang. Hey, I want to thank Ann again for 3 hours of expertise. Yay! Um, Definitely see you're very qualified to teach this. And those of you that are still on, thank you for joining us. Hope to see you next Thursday and the following Thursday. So hope you all have a good weekend. So long, everybody.